December 7, 1944. Dawn breaks across the skies above Tokyo. The air is frigid, the horizon still glowing from the fading night fires of industrial furnaces. Japanese anti-aircraft crews scan the heavens with bloodshot eyes, their ears trained for the low growl of engines. But what they hear instead is something alien. Fey thunder, not from the altitude of Zero fighters or B-29s they had known, but from far above, so high that the sound seems to roll down like thunder from the heavens themselves. Imperial Japanese Army Air Defense Report. Deck 1944. Spotters crane their necks, searching, disbelieving. Then they see them. Vast silver wings glinting against the rising sun, flying higher than anything they had ever faced. The Boeing B-29 Superfortresses, America's new weapon of the Pacific. Engines roared at altitudes nearing 31,000 feet, well above the reach of most Japanese interceptors. Gunners fired upward desperately, but their shells burst far below the intruders, painting the sky with impotent black puffs of flak. U.S. Army Air Force's mission debrief. Deck 1944. On the ground, civilians pause in their morning routines, frozen as shadows of giants drift across rooftops. Even seasoned officers of the Imperial Japanese Army shake their heads in disbelief. For months, Tokyo's defenders had trained for the familiar arcs of B-17s or B-24s. But this was something different. The Americans had leapt ahead into a new dimension of warfare. The B-29s were not just bombers. They were a force from beyond the ceiling of Japan's defenses. "They come from the stratosphere," one flak officer murmured, stunned as his crews adjusted useless dials. Bundesarchiv. Captured officer interrogation. By late 1944, Japan was a nation under siege. Its empire stretched thin, its fleets crippled, its armies stalled across Burma, China, and the Pacific Islands. Yet at home, the Japanese public believed the mainland was still beyond America's reach. After all, no bomber had yet crossed the distance. Tokyo, Osaka, Nagoya. These were cities long spared from the fire that had consumed Berlin, Hamburg, and Cologne. Geography itself seemed to shield Japan. That illusion shattered when the B-29 appeared over the homeland, for the first time in daylight raids. U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey. 1946. The Superfortress was unlike any machine the Japanese had ever seen. Designed at staggering cost, more than $3 billion, a sum greater than the Manhattan Project itself, it represented the pinnacle of American industrial power. Crews called it the ship that could fly to Tokyo and back without pause, its range exceeding 3,000 miles. Boeing Engineering Report, 1943. In contrast, the Japanese Mitsubishi A6M-0, once a symbol of superiority, gasped for air above 28,000 feet. Against the B-29, it was a relic, outclimbed and outgunned. For the defenders, the psychological shock was immediate. Fighter squadrons scrambled from airfields outside Tokyo, their Nakajima Ki-44 Tojo and Kai-61 Tony, interceptors clawing upward. But at 30,000 feet their engines sputtered, performance lagged, and oxygen ran thin. Pilots, trained in the art of dogfighting, found themselves powerless. They fired at impossible angles, their guns falling short, tracers arching away into the abyss. What few managed to close in described the bombers as untouchable fortresses, rising out of reach like castles in the clouds. Dramatized composite. Derived from Pilot Diaries, 1944. In American planning rooms months earlier, generals had foreseen this exact moment. General Henry Hap Arnold, commander of the U.S. Army Air Forces, demanded a weapon that could leap across the Pacific's expanse and strike the Japanese heartland directly. Engineers at Boeing, led by visionary men like Ed Wells and Clarence Kelly Johnson, answered with unprecedented innovations: pressurized cabins, remote-controlled gun turrets, Wright R-3350 engines delivering 2,200 horsepower each. It was not just a bomber. It was a technological ecosystem designed to dominate both distance and altitude. Technical Manual TM-92294, 1943. As the formations reached the skies above Tokyo, bombs began to fall. Precision strikes on aircraft factories, engine plants, and railway hubs echoed the doctrine of daylight strategic bombing perfected in Europe. Explosions tore through Kawasaki Works and Nakajima aircraft assembly lines, scattering steel, glass, and men. Yet what struck Japanese defenders hardest was not just the destruction, but the fact that their counterattacks barely scratched the intruders. In that first major raid alone, less than 2% of the B-29s were lost, an unheard-of survival rate compared to European operations. U.S. Army Air Force's After-Action Report, DEC 1944. Civilians watched with awe and terror as contrails scribbled across the sky. The bombers, dozens abreast, seemed to move with mechanical inevitability, their silver skins reflecting sunlight like swords of heaven. Priests described them as God's chariots in whispered sermons, while newspapers under strict censorship attempted to downplay the raids. But among the people, a creeping realization set in. If these giants could fly above the nation's defenses now, what could stop them tomorrow? Tokyo Civilian Diary, DEC 1944. For the Japanese High Command, the dilemma was grim. To adapt, they ordered desperate measures, stripping armor from fighters to give them a few hundred extra meters of climb, training pilots for ramming attacks, even planning to launch rocket-powered interceptors from makeshift ramps. But the speed of innovation could not match America's assembly lines. Each B-29 carried nearly 20,000 pounds of bombs. Each loss to Japan cost them nothing compared to the devastation inflicted. Bureau of Ordnance Report, 1944. Still, the Americans did not find perfection in these early raids. The R-3350 engines overheated, bomb sighting through the thin stratosphere proved unreliable, and high winds over Japan, the yet unnamed jet stream, scattered bomb patterns widely. Crews returned with stories of bombs missing entire districts, of flak bursts rocking cabins, of engines aflame mid-flight. Pilot log, 498th Bomb Group, DEC 1944. The B-29 was a marvel, but it was also an experiment being tested in real combat, yet even flawed. Its presence above Tokyo shifted the balance of the Pacific War. American airmen felt a surge of confidence. This was the hammer strike promised after Pearl Harbor, the revenge brought to the enemy's doorstep. For the Japanese, it was a harbinger of something worse to come. Each mission stretched the boundaries of technology, tactics, and endurance. And each mission pressed Japan closer to a breaking point it could neither anticipate nor resist. As December faded into the new year, one fact echoed across the Pacific. Japan's skies were no longer safe. The B-29 had rewritten the laws of engagement, and while the Japanese scrambled to find answers, the Americans were already preparing to use their new weapon in ways that would burn its name into history forever. The true secret of the superfortress, its hidden advantage, was yet to be revealed. And when it was, the Empire of Japan would face not just high-altitude raids, but a storm of fire unlike anything the world had ever witnessed. March 9, 1945. The night sky over Tokyo was an inferno waiting to be lit. At 7:48 p.m., sirens wailed across the city, their mournful tones blending with the rumble of engines far above. But these were not the precise high-altitude daylight raids of December. Tonight, the Americans had come lower, darker, and deadlier. Hundreds of B-29 superfortresses, stripped of defensive armor and loaded instead with napalm and incendiary clusters, crossed the coast in waves. Their engines drummed like the heartbeat of an approaching giant. In the streets below, Japanese civilians clutched their families, unaware that within hours, the very air would ignite around them. U.S. Army Air Force's Mission Report, March 1945. What made this transformation possible? The B-29's hidden advantage was not only its range or its altitude, it was the sum of innovations, technical, industrial, and tactical, that converged to give America an aerial weapon no other nation could rival. Boeing's engineers had built the pressurized cabin, allowing crews to function at heights where Japanese fighters suffocated. Remote-controlled turrets, guided by analog computers, meant gunners could target enemies from multiple angles without exposing themselves. Technical Manual TM 9294, 1943. Each of its Wright R-3350 duplex Cyclone engines, though temperamental, pushed the bomber beyond 350 miles per hour, faster than many interceptors in Japan's arsenal. U.S. Army Air Force's Engineering Report, 1944. But numbers told the deeper story. Over 3,900 B-29s were produced between 1943 and 1946 at factories in Wichita, Marietta, and Renton. Each plant became a city unto itself, employing tens of thousands of welders, riveters, and draftsmen. In Wichita, Rosie the Riveter was not a slogan but a daily rhythm of women fastening sheets of aluminum to wings longer than a tennis court. Boeing Production Report, 1945. Japan, by comparison, was struggling to replace its dwindling fighter fleets, producing fewer than 500 advanced interceptors in 1945. The gap was not just technological, it was industrial. A tidal wave of steel and manpower against an island already strangled by blockade. U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, 1946. To the Japanese defenders, this advantage felt like betrayal by the laws of nature. Their Nakajima Ki-84, Frank, arguably Japan's most advanced fighter, could reach 34,000 feet on paper, but performance collapsed under combat loads. Oxygen failures, engine seizures, and ammunition shortages plagued every sortie. Imperial Japanese Army Technical Evaluation, 1945. Desperate pilots resorted to suicidal ramming tactics, climbing into the bombers' contrails and slamming their aircraft into wings or tails. Some succeeded, but most failed, vaporized by turret fire before they ever reached their targets. Dramatized composite, compiled from pilot diaries, 1945. The hidden factor that turned the tide in March 1945 was not just the bomber itself, but a tactical shift ordered by General Curtis LeMay. Recognizing that the jet stream shredded high-altitude precision, he gambled on low-level nighttime area bombing. Crews were told to strip armor, reduce defensive ammunition, and descend to between 5,000 and 9,000 feet. Instead of scattered precision bombs, each B-29 carried tons of M69 incendiaries designed to set wooden-paper Japanese homes ablaze. Bureau of Ordnance Report, 1945. The Super Fortress, once a machine of surgical strikes, became the delivery system for firestorms. At 10:30 p.m. on March 9th, the first waves reached Tokyo. Doors yawned open. From the bellies of the bombers fell not single payloads, but streams of fire. Clusters breaking apart, canisters bouncing into alleys, bursting into rivers of flame. The wind carried sparks across districts, igniting house after house until whole neighborhoods were swallowed in sheets of fire. The jet stream that once scattered bombs now fed the blaze with oxygen, turning Tokyo into a furnace. U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, 1946. Japanese firefighters, armed with hand pumps and buckets, were powerless. The conflagration grew so hot that canals boiled. Wooden bridges collapsed into molten rivers. Civilians fled into underground shelters, only to suffocate as oxygen was consumed above. By midnight, the city was a sea of fire visible to the bomber crews 200 miles away. In 6 hours, 16 square miles of Tokyo were erased. Over 100,000 civilians died, more than at Hiroshima or Nagasaki. Tokyo Metropolitan Police Report, March 1945. And through it all, the B-29s flew home. Of the 334 bombers dispatched, only 14 were lost. For the Americans, it was proof that altitude was no longer the only shield. Mass fire and industrial strength had become the decisive tools of war. For the Japanese, it was incomprehensible. Diaries recovered after the war speak of disbelief. The sky rains fire. Our fighters cannot touch them. Our flak bursts below them like toys. The city burns and the gods do not answer. Dramatized composite. Derived from civilian and officer testimonies, 1945. The technical specifications of the B-29 mattered, but they mattered most when married to doctrine. Its bomb bays, once loaded with 20,000 pounds of general-purpose bombs, could be reconfigured to carry incendiary clusters or even the atomic bombs that would later fall on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. U.S. Army Ordnance Circular, 1945. Its 141-foot wingspan, built with advanced alloys, allowed unprecedented lift at high altitudes. Its pressurized compartments gave crews endurance for missions lasting 14 hours or more, distances that Japanese aircraft could not dream of matching. Boeing Technical Report, 1944. Every feature was an answer to a problem no other air force had yet solved. Engineers behind the machine remained unsung during the war, but their names are etched into aviation history. Ed Wells of Boeing fought skeptics who doubted the pressurized design. Glenn Martin's assembly lines pioneered modular construction, shaving months from production schedules. Workers at the Glen L. Martin Company welded sections the size of houses, then shipped them across the continent to be joined with Boeing fuselages. Each rivet, each panel was part of the hidden advantage, an industrial machine greater than any single bomber. Boeing Production Memo, 1944. When LeMay's bombers struck again on March 10th, March 12th, and March 16th, Nagoya, Osaka, and Kobe suffered the same fate. Entire urban cores disappeared in flames. Japanese air defenses, designed for precision interception, collapsed under the scale and altitude flexibility of the B-29 campaign. By April, fighter regiments reported loss rates exceeding 70%, pilots barely surviving a single week of sorties. Imperial Japanese Army Air Force Report, April 1945. For every American bomber lost, dozens of Japanese defenders fell. In the control rooms of the Imperial General Staff, disbelief gave way to resignation. They had underestimated not only the machine, but the system that sustained it. Radar-directed formations, long-range escort fighters, logistical chains stretching from the Marianas to Kansas. Japan could build planes. It could not build an industrial network to match. "They strike from beyond our reach," one captured officer later confessed. "It is not only the machine, but the world that built it." Dramatized composite now, derived from interrogations. 1946. The decisive battle of the B-29 was not fought in a single raid, but in a sustained campaign that merged engineering, tactics, and psychology. Each strike eroded Japanese morale. Each night of fire convinced civilians that no defense was possible. Done like the Zero, a weapon of daring and individual skill, the B-29 represented a collective machine, an empire of factories, railroads, and engineers focused on one goal. It was the bomber that carried America's war to Japan's doorstep, and the hidden advantage was not only altitude, but everything that allowed it to command the skies. Yet the true impact of the B-29 was not confined to 1945. Its presence would reshape strategy, technology, and doctrine far beyond the war itself. But before the world could reckon with its legacy, Japan would first have to endure the firestorms still to come. In the smoldering aftermath of March 1945, Japan faced a reality it could no longer deny. The B-29 superfortress had stripped away illusions of safety, transforming the skies above the home islands into a battlefield Japan could not control. Night after night, week after week, the bombers came, hundreds at a time, painting the horizon in fire. From Tokyo to Nagoya, Osaka to Kobe, entire districts dissolved into ash. The psychological impact on both sides of the Pacific was as profound as the physical destruction. For the Americans, confidence surged. For the Japanese, despair deepened. And behind it all, the engineers, machinists, and logisticians who had built the B-29's world-spanning supply chain now became invisible combatants in the struggle. U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, 1946. For the Japanese population, the sense of helplessness was total. Unlike the precision daylight raids of Europe, the B-29 campaign erased distinctions between civilian and military space. Mothers carried children into canals, only to find the water boiling. Families dug into shelters, suffocating as oxygen vanished. Survivors recalled black rain of ash and embers coating their skin like tar. Dramatized composite. Survivor testimony, 1945. Word spread quickly. No city was beyond reach. The empire that had once expanded with unstoppable momentum was now imploding from the inside, its people battered not by armies on the ground, but by shadows in the sky. American airmen too bore the psychological weight. Crews described the sight of entire cities glowing red beneath their bomb bays. Some confessed in letters home that they feared what such destruction meant for humanity itself. Pilot letter 29th Bomb Group, 1945. Yet most believed they were hastening the end of a brutal war. The deaths of comrades on Saipan, Iwo Jima, and Leyte made mercy seem like weakness. Each mission was framed not as devastation, but as salvation, striking Japan so hard that surrender would be unavoidable. For many crews, survival was proof enough that the strategy worked. Strategically, the B-29 had achieved what no other weapon could. It bypassed the island defenses, naval lines, and shrinking perimeter of the Japanese Empire. Each sortie launched from bases in the Marianas was a dagger thrust into the enemy's industrial heart. Japan's war production, already choked by blockade, collapsed under the combined strain of bombing and resource starvation. Aircraft engine output fell by 75% within months, while munitions factories were reduced to rubble. U.S. War Department Production Analysis, 1946. With every mission, the bomber shortened the war not only by material destruction, but by convincing Japan's leaders that time itself was running out. In Japanese military councils, frustration boiled over. Generals admitted they had no weapon capable of matching the B-29. Interceptor projects like the Mitsubishi J-8M rocket plane sputtered into failure. Fuel shortages grounded what fighters remained. Pilots were ordered to ram bombers when possible, but even this suicidal tactic could not stop the raids. "We are fighting a phantom enemy," one officer later recalled in interrogation, "for they live where we cannot breathe and strike where we cannot reach." Dramatized composite. Interrogation notes, 1946. On the American side, the logistical effort sustaining the raids was as remarkable as the bombers themselves. Bases carved from Saipan, Tinian, and Guam became the busiest airfields on Earth. Entire islands were transformed into runways, maintenance depots, and fuel farms. Engineers worked tirelessly to repair overheating engines, redesign bomb racks, and adapt the planes for incendiary missions. In many cases, young mechanics just months out of trade school kept the giants flying with improvisation, hammering warped panels back into place, scavenging parts from wrecks, and working in shifts around the clock. U.S. Army Air Force's Maintenance Report, 1945. These men never dropped bombs, but without them the bombers would never have left the ground. The B-29's presence reshaped Allied strategy. Where once invasion of Japan loomed as the only endgame, an operation projected to cost hundreds of thousands of lives, the firebombing campaign introduced the possibility of surrender by air power alone. When the atomic bomb was delivered to Tinian in July 1945, it was the B-29 that became its vehicle. The Enola Gay and Bockscar, outwardly identical to the thousands of other superfortresses, carried weapons unlike anything seen before. Hiroshima and Nagasaki, destroyed in August 1945, became the final proof that the bomber had changed not only the war, but the future of warfare itself. Manhattan Engineer District Report, 1946. The psychological shock of the B-29 endured long after the last bombs fell. Japanese survivors spoke of silver demons in the sky, an image seared into memory across generations. American commanders, meanwhile, saw confirmation of a new doctrine, that industrial might, delivered by strategic bombers, could decide wars. The U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, while acknowledging limitations and immense civilian cost, concluded that Japan would have surrendered by November 1945 without invasion, largely due to the B-29 campaign. U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, 1946. In the Cold War that followed, the B-29 became the template for an age of nuclear delivery. Its successors, the B-50, B-47, and B-52, owed their lineage to the breakthroughs of the superfortress. Pressurization, long-range endurance, remote gunnery, all became standards in strategic aviation. The lesson was clear. In modern war, altitude, range, and payload were as decisive as any army in the field. Industrial warfare had shifted permanently from the trenches to the skies, yet the cost cannot be measured in factories destroyed or square miles burned. It lies in the human toll, the civilians who perished in firestorms, the pilots who never returned from missions, the machinists who built until their hands bled, believing they were shortening the agony of war. The B-29 was not only a machine of steel and rivets, it was the sum of millions of hours of human labor, innovation, and sacrifice. Its legacy is written in both the fire over Tokyo and the peace that followed surrender. In the ruins of Tokyo, one survivor, interviewed years later, described watching the bombers pass overhead as the city burned. They looked like stars drifting across the heavens. But they were not stars. They were our fate, dramatized post-war testimony. 1951. The B-29 had begun as a secret project, an experiment in pushing technology beyond the known limits of aviation. It ended as the weapon that forced an empire to its knees and inaugurated the atomic age. Its story is both triumph and tragedy, a reminder that innovation can be as destructive as it is visionary. In modern war, the lesson remains stark. Altitude can shield, range can strike. But it is the fusion of technology and industry that conquers. The B-29 proved that the battlefield was no longer bound by geography. The world itself had become the target, and the sky the domain of decision. And so from the flames of Tokyo to the silence of Hiroshima, the superfortress wrote its name into history. Not only as a machine of war, but as a symbol of the era when mankind learned to bring fire from the heavens.